All right, gonna have the Akash deployment video today. I know I've been working on this one for a while. So first thing we're gonna do is a couple prerequisites. First thing, taking swap file, turning it off, and then turning it off permanently. We're also gonna disable our firewall if there is one. And then from there, we're gonna set up our net filters. I'm gonna have a link to everything that I'm cutting and pasting here from put it on the Google Docs so that folks can take a look at it. And essentially, if you just copy and paste, as you see here, you'll have a Akash provider up and running in no time. So we have to load the module. And that's what the mod probe there is. Then we're just going to double check and make sure our IP tables went in correctly. We got ones there, so we're good. Next thing we're going to do is install containerd. And this is what we're going to use to containerize our deployments and called pods. So few commands here. We're gonna get the files that we need, and then from there we're going to reset the system daemon, start the containerd, and we're going to enable it so that it starts on startup. Basically, we're just gonna be downloading a lot, setting a lot of variables, and we're probably going to break this into two videos. First video, we're going to set up our Kubernetes. We're going to get our Akash installed and set up the provider. And then we're going to have another video and we'll talk about how to add extra nodes to the Kubernetes cluster. So now we're going to install our container network interface. This is essentially networking for the pods. And again, we're setting our variables, telling what kind of architecture, what version, and we're going to pull it from GitHub and then extract it to its final destination. And what we're doing here is deployments on Digitalocean. Definitely you want to be using at least 2 CPU cores. From my testing, it looks like we'd probably be beneficial to run the largest single node that you feel comfortable paying. Again, it's risky. There's no guaranteed return. Not financial advice, but Akash has done pretty well. Here we're going to install our Cubelet container runtime interface. This is the interface that's required by kubeadmin and Cubelet. So really, this guy's set out to pretty much make it very easy just to follow along. This probably took me 3 weeks of testing different versions, rolling through different things. Big shout out to Andrei Aropov, and I'll put a link to his guide. A lot of this is from a mix of his guide, the Akash deployment guide, and lots of time in the Discord trying to get help. So we got this installed. We're going to add some information to a YAML file. So I prefer Nano. So use Vim, use whatever you like as your editor. Next thing we're going to do is we've got to set add a key to our repositories so that we can download the gvisor, run sc, and run c. And once you get that okay there, we're going to add the repository, update our repositories, and then we're going to download the two programs themselves. It's basically adding the GPG key so that we know we're downloading it from a legitimate resource. All right, we got that in there. Next thing we're going to move on to is configuring our containerd to run, to utilize gvisor. And basically we're going to open another file. This time it's a config toml file. And we're going to drop in some commands to give it some information. Again, these commands you just cut and paste. And get yourself up and running. I'm going to restart the service now. And after that, we're going to run a test and make sure that gvisor is working. So in order to do that, we've got to set up a couple configuration, a couple JSON files. It's basically going to give a layout of how we want to run. And calling it sandbox because we're just, it's like playing in the sandbox for it. It's basically going to give it what images to pull for the pods, what names to give it, and from there we're going to start the containers up. So here when I was recording it, I made a mistake in order. I've corrected that in the document that's on the Google Drive. So as long as you follow that order, you won't have any problems. You won't have the problems that you see here. So basically once we have those files made, we're going to start that pod with that container ID that we just made. Biggest thing that we're going to look through here is just make sure that gvisor will start inside of a pod. So once we execute the pod, we're going to make sure that we see a starting gvisor message. Now this in GINX, this took some debugging, and actually he's updated his online guide to correspond with adding this pool image. It wasn't pulling correctly, so we had to go back and figure out what's happening. And of course, even after I figured it out, I made the same mistake when I was screen capturing. So here it looks like we've got everything set up. We're just going to take a look inside of our containers and see that everything's essentially everything's there. And once we know it's there, we can execute it. Now we see our starting gvisor message. So that's good, and we can move on to the next step. We have gvisor going in a pod. What we're going to do is we're going to tear down that pod. Basically just getting it out of our cluster, so we're not going to be using it, so we don't need it there. We'll get rid of it. Once we get rid of that, we're going to install Kubernetes. Kubernetes is pretty amazing. It's basically built-in balancing across nodes. You can have see lots of folks doing Raspberry Pi clusters, which I'm still in the process of, but there's plenty of videos if you're interested in doing that. Could easily run a cost provider and have a Raspberry Pi cluster behind it. Probably wouldn't get too many winning bids because the CPUs aren't powerful and the memory's not powerful. So here we're just going to set variables. We're going to set where we want it to go. We're going to set what version we're looking for. And then we're going to pull it. And then we're going to set it to be executable. We're going to get Kubeadmin, Cubelet, Cube Control, and the Cubelet system daemon service. And then we're going to enable the systemd service. Let's just make sure that this starts up each time that we restart the machine, and we don't have to do anything if, for example, the machine goes down or lose power, so on. Let's just start right back up. So there we have the systemd file for Cubelet. Very similar. You'll see we'll do the same thing for the Akash provider at the end of this video. Alright, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our Kubeadmin config file. And basically what you want to do is just cut and paste what I've got in there. If you're very fluent with Kubernetes, feel free to make any changes that you see necessary. I'm not the best here. I've just done the legwork trying to make it easy for you folks to get involved with the Akash network. Won't have to purchase this super mini, and the developers have made it clear that they're not really interested. It's not a top priority to develop that device, so it'd be up to folks like us to teach each other, spend the time, and spread that knowledge. So we have our YAML file, and we're going to run. What we're going to do first is we're going to install or enable IP forwarding. So here we're enabling it for future reboots, excuse me, and then we're going to enable it for this session here, and see if it returns a 1. We know we're good. So once we've gone through this, we won't have to do it again. It'll all save. So now we're going to initialize with our YAML file with the configuration. This does take a little bit of time. Like I was saying before, we're using Digitalocean. I think this is running just on a 2 CPU. So if you had a big deployment or a big node, it would run faster. But once we get this set up, we should see our Kubernetes control plane is initialized successfully. And that's the good news, and we'll move to it now. It's going to give you some information, and we're going to want to copy this for later. So we're going to use this export kubeconfig here. This is what's going to tell Kubernetes all the information that we've set up. And then you're also going to want to copy that kubeadmin join. This is the token and the information for certificates that we're going to use to join up additional nodes to this control plane. Now here we're going to use this and set this in our current session so that all the information is there. So once we get that set up, we're going to check our nodes, and we're going to see here that we've got the Akash demo node, control plane, and master. It's stating that it's not ready, but we've got to install some networking. And this also doesn't have all the roles that we need it to be having. You see that CNI plugin is not initialized. Had to go back when I was screen grabbing this, and I missed a command, but I fixed that in the documentation, and we'll fix it here too. All right, so next thing we're going to look at is it's called Taints, and that's basically a way of restricting what each pod or each node is capable of doing. So currently we'll have a no schedule taint on this master. We need to remove that so that the master is has the ability to schedule. And we're basically going to add all the roles that are necessary. And now you can see that we have quite a few more labels, and we still need to circle back. All right, so next thing we're going to do is just going to take a look at our nodes, make sure that everything's running. You'll see here that the DNS is not running, core DNS, so we're going to install that. And now we're going to install a Calico, and that's what's going to eliminate the CNI plugin not initialized issue that we're seeing there. So basically we're going to set some variables again for our DNS server. And take note of that IP. We're going to use that again here in a moment. We need to edit a config YAML file and swap that out. Basically there's an issue with Akash that's needs an additional DNS service running for them to communicate. Possibly won't be a problem moving forward, but currently it is. So we're basically just going to create a pod that's going to run a local DNS server for us, and we're going to edit the configuration to point to that DNS file. All right, so we're just going to punch that in here, and we're going to restart our Cubelet. There are some notes on how to test. You basically can deploy a pod, go inside the pod, and make sure that that's set up correctly. And we'll be able to test that shortly when we deploy our gvisor. We'll double check that we can resolve and that we can get external internet access. So here we're setting up the pod for gvisor to run, and we're going to apply that. And you can see there that gvisor was created. And now we're going to create a DNS test file that's going to essentially deploy a pod that we can go into. We can check our gvisors up, and we can make sure that we have DNS resolution. And we'll just check that by pinging. We'll check our external internet access, and we're just going to ping Google and Google's DNS servers. So here we're shooting back and installing Calico. This is the step that was missed, was giving us those CNI plugin issues. So we'll just restart our service, and like I said, we've fixed that in the documentation, so you won't have that problem. Now you can see that it's ready. And we're going to go ahead and deploy that DNS test pod. All right, so here's where we're going to make a DNS test.yaml file, and we're going to drop in all the information needed: the name, the namespace, what type of container it's going to be, what image it's going to use, and then from there we're going to apply it so that it's inside of our it's running in our pod, and now we're going to execute that pod. Now you can see here we're inside of it, and we're just going to use dmessage to check some log information. We can see at the top that starting gvisor is good. We've got some generic information there. And then we've got our ready, letting us know that it's good to go. I love some good jokes in there, and checking the naughty and nice process list. It's pretty good. So first thing we're going to do is just going to ping, see if we've got external internet. And then we're going to ping Google, make sure that we can resolve Google. And both of those commands worked correctly. I'm going to stop those commands. We're going to drop out. And we are going to move on to the next step here. So there are some guides online of how to encrypt your information here. Feel free to go and research that. From here, we're going to move right into Akash. And this becomes, so we've got our Kubernetes running. We've got our containerd running. We've got our networking set up. And we've checked and we know that that's running well. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get the Akash. We're going to make a user. And we're just going to call that user Akash. It's not going to log in, so we'll have to be SUD into that account. So once we're in there, you can see now we're in our Akash, add Akash demo. Going to CD into our home directory, as you will drop into the root directory and won't have access. Going to create the Akash provider directory where we're going to put our Akash files. And then here we're going to grab all the required YAML files from Akash, from the GitHub. And this is what's going to set up all the configuration for the Akash to run on the Kubernetes. So a couple things to take note here is that you can change your names to whatever you like. We've used Akash demo. So here we drop back into our root, and we're going to move over our admin config file. And we're going to give our new user access to that configuration file. This will make it easier when we go to checking the status of our nodes. Basically, without it, the Akash user won't know the information necessary to communicate with the Kubernetes setup. And we're going to set up our config location variable. And that's basically just telling Kubernetes where to look for the configuration files that are needed. That admin file also has access information. Essentially, you don't want to give that out. Protect that admin file. So again, we'll get back to grabbing some GitHub files, configuration files for Akash itself, and we're also going to grab Akash pre-built binaries. So each one of these is going to create different required network and pods for the Akash to run. And once we have all these, we're going to take a look at our nodes. And you do need a public IP, and you will need a host name. So personally, I use GoDaddy. I own the minershive.com, and I just go in there and I can add an A record and give it this deployment's external ID, and we've called it akashdemo.theminershive.com. So if you don't have a domain of yourself, you will need, you can use some third party. I think there's some free stuff, no IP, dynamic DNS. But honestly, a domain doesn't cost much. I think it cost me like $50 a year, and you can use it for lots of fun deployments. For example, set yourself an email server up, or a web server, or whatever you may need. So here we're going to export a bunch of variables, so Akash knows where to look for our configuration. It knows what our domain is. It knows where to look for the nodes and chain IDs, making sure that we're on the mainnet. The keyring backend is just a file, and provider key is default. Now I have read that you can put your key in there, but I haven't found the need for it. What we're going to do here next, you can change. So we've got all our variables set up, and we're going to grab the Akash binary itself, and we're going to set that binary in a path so that we can execute it. You can just go directly to the directory itself and run these commands. Just makes it a little easier if you add it to your path. So next thing here we're going to do is we're going to set up our account, generate a key. It's going to give us our address. It's going to give us our mnemonic, which, you know, as with any crypto, that mnemonic is your only way to retrieve your funds, or to get access to this wallet if it's lost. So we're going to move our admin configuration into a hidden folder inside of that user directory. And when we go to set up our service, we'll want to know where that directory is. So here's the command that's going to give us our keys, generate the keys. And you'll just create a passphrase for it. And you'll want to grab all this and keep it over for later. You'll need your address here in a moment. The mnemonic, it's up to you how you save that. I know there's lots of different ways. Some pretty cool stuff on Amazon that you have little metal containers you can put the words in. I just print them out. I have a safety deposit box, so that's also an option. So now we're going to set up our provider .yaml. This is basically going to give our host a name, and it's going to give us a region. And this is where we're also going to have our domain. So for me, and I have noticed that region doesn't really matter. So you can put wherever. It may matter more down the road when folks are choosing where to deploy on the Akash network. But currently you can put anything in there. I think we're going to change it to US East. But I've seen some providers that have their name in it, so it's clearly not a non-issue. So now we're going to set the Akash account variable with our account that we just received, and you can obviously copy this paste without setting these in variables, but just makes it a little bit easier. And make sure that you're diligent in checking that you've got the right account information. and that the account information repeats back correctly. Don't want to make a mistake. This does cost 50 Akash to fund. And today, I mean, most cryptos took a dive. It's September 8th. So I want to say it's probably about $150, $160 to get this funded. That's just required to make bids, and you will lose some making bids. I think it's 1,000 micro AKT, and you'll lose some running the nodes, just checking for balances. So what we've got there is we checked our balance. We didn't have anything. No, I used gate.io. I just snagged some Akash, and I sent it directly from there to that address. And it took a few minutes, but you see we ran that again, and we've got our Akash in there, 54. So now we're going to use that provider, and we're going to create that provider on the network, and we're going to transmit that to the blockchain. So you can see there that it was accepted in the blockchain, and now we are a provider with our Akash demo.theminershive.com. The next thing that we've got to do, now this was just going to show us, and I had to reinstall something. I've moved that to the prerequisites in the guide. So unfortunately I have to back out, get back to root, install that, go back to our Akash, set our variables, and then continue on. But basically what we're going to do here is we're going to pull from the Akash list of providers, and we're going to make sure that our provider is listed in those providers. Now this shows you right here if you don't have your variables set correctly, Akash won't know where to look for the configuration or where to look for the nodes. So we got to drop those back in and run our command for a third time. And now you can see, looking through here, you can see my node that runs my provider. That's Akash.theminershive. And then you can also see our Akash demo.theminershive. So we know that the network sees it. You can see that we're set in US East. And we are connected with the network. So the next thing we have to do is create certificates. And that's what allows us to communicate to the blockchain and associates it with this particular provider. So basically we're going to run the command. It's going to cost, again, a little bit of a fee. Just type your passphrase in, and then it's going to broadcast it. And once we get a response, we'll know that we've got our certificate created. You can also use a blockchain explorer to take a look at these after it's all done. But there we have a completed transaction. And our certificate is created. Now you can revoke that, and as for the provider, you can also update that. So if you redeploy on a different side of the US or a different continent, you can update those things. You can also update the names, and if you decide to. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a file called keypass with our passphrase in it. Obviously I've cut that out, and so we just instead of having that where that says your password, just enter what you used as your passphrase. So the last thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create another file, startprovider.sh. This is going to have our our provider information, our passphrase, our node information, our chain IDs, what fees we want to charge, our bid strategies, all sorts of different information. So, best option, go in here and change out your host names. If you choose to use a different node, and copy the other settings, they've found that these are the most optimal settings that reduce the cost of running and keeps you competitive with your bids. So I'm just double checking my node. There's some issues with 4-ball. Well, if you use that Big Dipper site, you can see that it's quite a slow response. So I'm seeing better results with this other node. And these nodes are on the GitHub, so you can just pull them down. What I did is I pulled all the nodes and just pinged them, found the most responsive one, and that's the node that I've chosen to use here. So we just export it and echo it, make sure that it's reporting the right thing. And that's what we've entered here under the node flag. So you can see that we've changed our host name, we've changed our the node. We're going to save that. We're going to make it executable. And then we're going to drop back into our root. And once we're back in our root, we're just going to add this to our systemd so that this starts up when the computer starts up. Yeah, from there we'll double check our logs, take a look at a log. There's some errors that are coming up that been trying to get some more understanding about through the Discord. The general consensus is that it's not a problem and it can be ignored at this point. Like I was saying earlier, I think it's probably the best option is to deploy one node with the maximum amount of CPU and memory you feel comfortable with. Because currently I have a provider running with 3 nodes. It is kind of nice because you can have this provider running. And for example, here I have a workstation at home that I've installed Kubernetes and linked it. And it's a node. So instead of having all your deployment on a DigitalOcean or a pay by the hour type service, you can just utilize home network. You've got some miners with a good CPU. Just install, now for example, if you're using Hive OS, just run the next video. We're going to show how to add a node. Just run those same commands and connect that right into your Kubernetes cluster. So here we'll just let this run a second. We'll just take a look at some of the info here. Now you will see insufficient capacity for reservation, and this is why I think it's probably best to have one deployment with the maximum resources you feel comfortable spending on. Now, if you have a public IP at home and you've got a Xenon server going unused, by all means deploy it 100%. It's quite a bit more economical to do it yourself. But like I've mentioned in some of my videos, I don't currently have a public IP, and my ISP wants me to pay 5 times the amount to get a business account in order to get a static public IP, which is ridiculous. For my needs, I don't. It's not that necessary. So I've got my node that's been running. We're going to scroll through these logs trying to find a fulfilled bid or fulfilled reservation, which unfortunately there's not one to look at to show you. But that generally you'll see some ignored because you'll have insufficient capacity, and then you'll see yourself bid completes. So that's essentially going out and making a bid. And you'll see bid failed reservations. You'll see different information. If you can take a look at it, as long as it starts up, you won't have any issues. All right, so we're gonna move over and we're gonna start cut this right here, and I think it's a pretty long video. But we're going to switch over. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to add a node, and that's just a pretty short video on how to do that. So appreciate y'all watching. Hit that subscribe, hit that thumbs up, drop some comments. I do what I can to respond. Probably every week or 2 weeks I can get on here. Got a new got the Aware Element video coming up, Planet Watch, got a Golem video, got quite a few different videos in the works. So keep the trend, try to save us some money, deploy what we can on our own. All right, thanks for watching. Good night.